I think also we talked earlier about this unique challenge of being a minority within a unique group in society. And I think it's their society's expectations of girls that interfere with this as well, which is really difficult. We've talked a lot about this, so if you want this presentation, I'm sure it's on a stick somewhere, but I won't go into this in detail because obviously it's been talked about before. But when it comes to education, it's these sort of things that are so important. If you want to change your curriculum to meet the needs of girls, you can do that so easily because their interests are so mainstream. They're a lot more intense, but they're mainstream. The one thing I've always found that I absolutely love about girls, that they are so controlling. And they're so demand avoidant. I'm having a real problem here. They're very demand avoidant, but they are controlling. And there's a wonderful story at one of our schools where one of the parents complained about the level of homework that her son was getting. And he was becoming so stressed out. Anyway, it transpired it was the girl that sat next to him that was setting the homework and was testing him in the mornings. And that is so typical of our girls. They're just so wonderfully controlling. And I know a lot of men in the audience would find that quite rare for women, but, it does happen. I think one of the difficulties is the complexity of female social relationships. I must say, as a youngster, boys are much easier to play with, boys are much easier to be friends with. You can do things together. You don't have to have this little chat on telephones, phone afterwards, text, say how much I love you, you're my own best friend. They are very, very complicated. And if our girls are going to want to be part of this, we have to directly teach all of this. We can't just assume they'll pick it up out the ether like we tried to do. And I think that's the sort of thing that's going to have to go into the curriculum for these girls. Also an understanding of what friendship means. People think that people with autism often don't want friends. Girls want friends, but they want one. And they want one special, special friend, and they own that friend. Three's not company for girls. They own that friend. And I think that's quite a difficult thing because a lot of girls get put off by that. It seems very nice for a while, then it becomes controlling. It's almost like stalking. That girl's always there. And then she can't understand why the girl doesn't want to be friends with her anymore. And so then she goes back into that depression again. So there's that spiral that goes on. And looking at things like how do we develop social understanding for these girls? What do we need to teach them? And I think the starting block is a lot lower. One of my students was looking at this. Things like, what are friends for? What are the rules? How do I get one? But basically, what's in it for me? And is it worth the effort? Because it is quite an effort. And it's these sort of things which I think we need to tease out at school. This is what education's all about. The play and imagination is absolutely fascinating, and this is one of the best teaching tools. Somebody earlier talked about role play, drama classes. This is where girls come into their own, because they almost do it naturally. I've known of girls that actually copy people to such an extent they actually lose their own personality in it. That's also a worry, because that's when sometimes they have to abuse themselves to actually get their identity back. So you've got this whole complex thing again. But we're not picking it up at school. And so we're not picking up that these children are not eating, that they might be abusing themselves in a range of ways. And as you were saying earlier, it's a lot more subtle than we expected. But I think the bottom part is really important, that these girls are suffering in silence, mainly in mainstream schools. And they seem to go into the ether some way. So what does that say about their future? And when you look at the statistics of women with autism who actually hold down jobs or have meaningful relationships compared to men, it's very low. And I think we as educationists have a lot to answer for that, because we probably haven't given them the skills from an early age to deal with that. What we're doing now at the National Autistic Society schools is that we're starting our first girls' meeting day. Seeing there's so few of them, it's a bit of a duff thing to do it in one school because it'd be one girl. So we're having this girls' meeting day where they can get together and have a girly day. And we're hoping to include our adult women in that, because a lot of them have lived very isolated lives. So I think watch the space. That could be quite interesting. When talking about academically, they are not that different from boys academically, and the sort of things that we would teach boys, the strategies we'd use for boys, we'd also use for girls. But I think an interesting thing, they tend to find males more compatible, and they have similar thought patterns, so they'll often gravitate towards the males. But when it comes to their interests and things, we can really focus on the girls' interests. Same sort of things as boys, pre-teaching content, using special interests to teach. And that, as I say, this topic-based learning. It's quite easy to arrange a big curriculum around horses It's a lot more difficult in, say, high-rise buildings. Well, maybe wrong, maybe high-rise buildings. And they always think girls have much better writing, production. They're quite surprised when girls have bad handwriting. Well, that's not the case with our girls. But also there's teaching strategies that are good for girls, modeling of people and video modeling and role play and drama and watching what's going on television. A colleague of ours, Dr. Judy Gould, says it's very important that anybody who's doing a diagnosis needs to know what's going on, what the favorite shows are. At the moment, you're going to be diagnosing girls because you can think, oh, wow, what great pretend play. But if you haven't watched last night's episode of whatever it is, you can be conned. And these girls are absolutely brilliant at conning everyone. Social skips, things like power cards. So that, I think, is sort of very much sort of self-evident. I want to go more into the important things, I think, of this hidden curriculum for girls. Things like teaching independence and reducing vulnerability. Things like gender identity. How do you know if you're a girl? What is a girl? Emotional well-being and fostering mental health. And we talked earlier about sex education. Not teaching these children any sex education and how to look after themselves is doing them the greatest disservice ever. And we need to have girl-orientated sex education classes starting right from the bottom. And things like personal hygiene and all of that starting years before things even happen to these girls with all their sensory issues are brought right through this whole thing. The other problem with them is that they're so demand avoidant, they'll just say yes. If I say yes, you back off. We've got to learn not to back off if they say yes, because that gives them the wrong messages from a very early age. We need to look at some way around that isn't entrenched. So, talked about preparing. You've got to prepare these girls for the changes and the requirements step by step. And the girls tend to find it much easier to do it by books. They like books and movies. Because if you tell them what to do, they don't want to do it. They're just like me that way. If you tell me what to do, I won't do it on principle. Most girls I know are like that. So they tend to like to read books or do movies and things like that. Independence versus vulnerability. A lot of women complain that they weren't given the independence they need to actually be strong and go out there and live lives. And they're very vulnerable. So we need to teach them skills to overcome that. But we can't closet them and hide them away forever. That's not what education's about. It's about taking these calculated risks to give them that future. Cyber independence is another one we need to teach in schools. Girls are far more likely than boys to. They are very, very au fait with all of this IT, but they're far more likely to give away information. If they're asked what their name are, what their numbers are, they'll give it all. And they will comply. Because people back off. If I do what you say, you'll back off. And they're more likely to respond to communication. So they are incredibly vulnerable. And at my school, I can already see that sort of thing happening, not with the girls, but with the boys. And when it happens with the girls, it's probably going to be a lot more difficult. Also, the expectations of them. I love that picture. That's so typical. Women are affected by the same way as their male counterparts, but however, they're doubly challenged by the added assumptions that society places on their female gender. And a lot of adult women find this incredibly difficult. So what are we doing at schools to make them say, listen, you don't have to be like Barbie, and you don't have to be like so-and-so. You can just be you, and being the best you possible is great. And we've got to give them that self-esteem, because otherwise they're going to be flipping all over the place, not knowing where they fit in, how it all happens. I know some women who have no empathy at all. I know others that are so empathic, they empathize with everything. Don't tell them anything's happened to you. You'll have them in tears in 2 minutes. You've got these two extremes. And as I was saying, this self-confidence is so important. One thing we tend to do is when the girls are getting to develop their own self-esteem, they love collecting facts, but facts on people, not stick insects and things like that. So they like doing their all about me books, all about each other books, collecting things about each other. But this is a very good way of building up their self-esteem. This is me, I'm wonderful, I'm a girl, I can do this, I can do anything. We talked earlier about emotional well-being and fostering mental health. I think this is one of the most important things, because if you can have the most fantastic degrees in the world, but if you don't have emotional well-being and mental health as an adult, it's really dreadful. And I've said about Atwood talking about the experience of girls in here. But I think the self-harm is a big thing, and the issues with eating. And Gilberg and Bilstead maintain that 18 to 23% of adolescent girls with anorexia also present with signs of Asperger's syndrome. And I look back now at some of the girls that I've known over time and the way they routinely will eat one thing, then walk around. You know, I'll stay awake for 20 minutes every hour at night because I'll burn up more calories, sort of way. And I can see that would lead later on into abuse. Bullying is another thing. Girls and boys bully in a very different way. And girls tend to be bullied less, but they seem to suffer more from it, almost like a post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think the bullying is so subtle. And I think that's part of the problem. It's not in your face. Girls are very subtle bullies. So how do we deal with that? And how can we deal with the consequences of that? So I think emotional well-being and fostering mental health really needs to be on the agenda. They also need social inclusion opportunities to be part of society, because that's what girls like to do. They also need female role models, and the only one I could find of their generation is Lady Hawk. And my boys tell me that she's okay. But she's the only girl I know that's a teenage role model with an autistic spectrum condition. So we need more girls out there. Another thing is our aim is to prepare girls for quality of life as adults and for work. And because they tend to choose subjects that are more male-orientated, I hope we're all teaching male-oriented subjects and not taking them in. They're doing typically female things. They might not want to do that. And I think this is really nice. I can learn social skills. They're very important, but I can't learn emotional relatedness. Parents and professionals, need to understand that having meaningful work is what gives us meaning. And that's Grandin in Atwood. And so many girls are saying, as women, if they had work, if they had a job, they'd have something that was important in their lives. So we need to do that. And finally, we need to equip girls with the knowledge and confidence to choose her own path for her. Society puts all of these expectations on all of us, and we get to a point where we all choose the route we want to go. We need to give our girls the skills to choose the route that they want to go. So whether they want to be, like recently I met two women that were absolutely fantastic. They were two Poles side. I don't know if Richard Mills is in here, but Richard introduced us to them. The one woman is from Russia, absolutely beautiful woman, who's been a dancer and this and that, and she has a couple of children. The other woman is a professor of neurobiology or something like that at the university. Two very confident women. You couldn't have said they each had the same condition if you looked at them. And I think that's so important. They are so different. So in summary, we need to give girls a completely different, additional hidden agenda to prepare them as adults. Because the future for girls with ASD is unlimited and boundless. And as parents and professionals, we can't let our own fears and lack of knowledge inhibit our girls' growth and independence. Thank you.
Thank you to you for the nice presentation.